Salutations, I'm Mirstruck Artist, and today we're making Mono and Six as dolls. I begin with 2 High Friends bases, and I begin by stealing 6 away. But don't worry, they'll be reunited soon. I remove 6's face paint with acetone and go in with Mr. Super Clear Spray and chalk pastels. I begin contouring and highlighting her face with browns and whites. I'm going for a drastic, highlighted and contoured look to make it extra defined, like how in the game her hood causes a great shadow onto her face. The light is usually drastic as well, so that's why I'm using a strong white lighting. We don't really see a lot of her face, as her bangs cover all the way down past her eyes and her hood is up for the entirety of the game. So, based off fan art and the general idea of what you think she'd look like, I'm giving her small, brown eyes and a calm but stern look. I'm using watercolor pencils to do the line work for her face. I use brown and black at first to sketch out the line work of her eyes. Slowly, I go one eye at a time, adding one detail on one side and then the same to the other to try and keep the face symmetrical. I also use the black on the inner corners of her nostrils and mouth. I'm filling in the sclera of her eyes with a white watercolor pencil and filling in the browns of her iris. I'm using a touch of red here and there too to give a kind of monstrous look to her, but something she can for the most part keep at bay. I darken her eyebrows and I shade her eyes with a gray pencil. I continue highlighting and shadowing her face with the brown and the white. I really liked playing as Six. She was an interesting character, especially dealing with the themes of monstrousness in childhood and what trauma and fear does to a kid in an environment. I'm not saying it's realistic or that the games are real, I'm just saying they have some aspects that are real and horrifying in the world that we know. I highlight the top of her eyelid to make that extra highlighted effect for the drastic lighting coming down on her face at an angle. I use a gray pencil to shadow the sclera of her eyes and create depth. I gave her more of a mono lid. Kind of funny, get it? Mono. I continue building the contrast on her face. I highlight the top of her monolid, her nose. I add extra shadowing here and there. I finish some shading, and that's what I have her look like. I think she's kind of cute looking, but also kind of traumatized looking in the backs of her eyes. I paint her scalp black with acrylic paint, and then I get it going doing her hairstyle now. I'm using black yarn acrylic wefts that I've already pre-made, which is just brushed out and flat ironed yarn, and I begin gluing it first all the way down into her face. I begin with her bangs because I just want to get that out of the way, and I usually begin on the back side of the hair, which is what you want to do especially when you're new to it and want any mistakes that you begin with to be in the back. But I knew that I really was so excited to give her bangs already and chop that off the front as soon as possible that I began there. I go around the sides of the front of her hair and slowly work towards the back. You want the very top of the head to be the last part done. I'm using Mod Podge to glue on her hair. You can use any type of glue that you want, this is just what works for me. After the glue has dried all the way, I go in with a pair of hair cutting scissors, which I find works best, and I begin slowly trimming down her hair. First a big chop to the general length that I want, and then finer pieces in bit by bit. She has long bangs with a bob, and pointy little bits that stick out here and there. I make sure to trim carefully as I cut the bangs to make sure I don't trim them too short. A few final trims here and there and a touch of glue and her hair is done and we can move on to her clothes. Six has an outfit underneath the hood that she wears in the games, but since bulky layers will show on the doll, I only do the pair of shorts that she wears underneath. I cut out 2 of the same pattern piece, I pin them good side to good side, and then on one side I sew from top down to the crotch and the other only the crotch area. Then I open up the pattern piece and pin it so the legs are separate. Then I sew from one side of the leg pant to the crotch, then back towards the other leg side. Normally you leave room for Velcro on the back, but I just hot glue gun it shut because her clothes are permanent. Moving on to Six's coat, these are the pieces that we'll be using. There's 1 back piece and 2 front pieces for the main body, and we begin by lining up the shoulders and sewing across. We repeat on both sides. Once that's sewn, I go ahead and flip it open to the good side. and I begin lining up the shoulder pieces. The sleeve and the shoulders of the dress itself will be facing each other, good side to good side. It's an awkward curve you have to learn to pin the shoulder on. You just have to use as many pins and go as slow as a time as you need. Here's what it looks like when it's flipped around and sewn, and then we just repeat on the other side. With both of the shoulder sleeves attached, we just go ahead and fold it to immerse into a regular dress. I sew along the dress, starting from the bottom of the dress up to the armpit and then straight to the wrist of the sleeve. Repeat on both sides. With that done, I just hem the bottom. I now get to turn it right side out and make sure that it fits 6. With the raincoat now on her body, I go ahead and fold inward the edges of the dress. I'm not gluing it shut yet, I'm making sure that it fits correctly and pinning it in place. I go ahead and take it off of her and sew along the pins. I double check that it fits correctly and looks good, and decide to take in a seam on her back using a ladder stitch, just to pull it a little bit tighter. Her pockets and the little latches on the front of her dress are just some flat fabric that I glue the edges to seal, and then glue on the front of the dress. These will be included on the pattern pieces at the end of the video. For the hood of her coat, these are the pieces that we'll be using. Basically just 2 pattern pieces for the front that you double. I take the 2 very top hood pieces and I align them around the top of the middle seam. This will be the very front seam that goes to the highest point. I sew along it and then flip it open. I double check that it looks symmetrical, and then I go and sew on the bottom front pieces. That's the left side, and here's the right. Pretty much everything in this pattern is symmetrical, so don't worry, you're going to figure it out if you go to make this on your own. For the top back pieces, we go ahead and sew them along the top as well to the top front pieces. Then I sew the sides together of the very bottom front piece to the bottom of the top back piece. That makes a corner right there, and you can start to see the hood taking shape. There's a big round opening where her face goes, so remember that if you ever get confused if you cut out these pattern pieces. Then I mimic on the other side. Here's how the hood is currently looking when you flip it right side out. You can see it already taking shape, and with right side facing out, we're going to flip it this way, and then fold the very back seams together, pin it in place, and sew along the back. Flipping it out, that went ahead and connected the back and front to make a very pyramid, fortune cookie-esque shape. You can see it coming together, and basically there's only the very back right now at the back of her head that's open. I flip it inside out again, and I line up the raw edges of the very back and sew along it to finally close the hood. I know that was a bit complicated looking, so if you have any questions if you go to recreate this yourself, feel free to comment and I will answer you to my best of my own abilities. Flip that inside out and put it on her head, and we can add the buttons. I used some rhinestones for her buttons, some miniature ones. Then I go right into painting all over her clothes. I just use watered down acrylic paints, some mustard yellows, some whites, and then some browns. We're beginning doing the shading, and then we'll make her look dirtier, how her raincoat does. The acrylic paint did kind of help make her outfit look a little bit more shiny, in the sense that her raincoat is actually plastic and meant to repel water. I made sure to add extra details to any edges of the pieces to really make it look like it caught light or dirt. I'm doing a mix of dry brushing and also just globbing on wet paint wherever it needs to be. Using a tiny paintbrush, I go ahead and do the line work around the buttons and pockets of her dress. Going a little bit darker, it helps to give the illusion of the art style of the game. Then using black acrylic paint, I fill in the inside of her hood to make it look extra dark and give it that shading that her hood gives over her face. For her accessories, I instantly thought of her music box. I cut up an Easter egg and found some bottle caps that I thought would be perfect for it. I burn extra holes using my hot glue gun into the top of the Easter egg bit. I file it down using a nail file to give it a texture to paint over. I slide into the top of the bottle cap and then hot glue gun it from the underside. And then begin wrapping it with paper to make the sides. I get a second bottle cap of the same kind and paint it black to go on the inside bottom. The rest of the music box gets a base coat of black as well for both the outside and inside. You have to make sure to paint the inside before the bottom gets sealed up forever. I cut and rolled up a piece of paper into a tube and painted it black to be the inside piece that the handle slots into. I glued that to the inside of the bell jar, and then I just inserted a paper clip that was bent to make the handle. Then we seal up the bottom of that other cap that we had painted black earlier. I trace out the bottom of the music box onto some cardstock and cut it up to help make some details for the top of the box. I bent out some curved shapes out of that cardstock and glue it along the top. I also rolled up a tube of paper and I glue it onto the handle for the music box. I take some puffy paint and I line the edges of the box as well. Let that dry all the way, it takes like a few hours in total, and then everything gets gone over in more black acrylic paint. I do some shading off screen on the box and then I draw on all the details with a white charcoal pencil. I had it in my head that I really wanted to make her Zippo lighter that Six has in the game, so I used some epoxy sculpt, some wire, and some hot glue for the flame, and I put it all together. I paint the lighter in grays and black for the body, and then I use white, blue, and a little bit of yellow and red for the flame itself. Blue? Yes, fire's blue at the bottom, usually. I couldn't leave the gnomes out of this little nightmare mess, so I decided to do some toothpicks and epoxy sculpt clay for the bottom of their body. To make sure that they could stand, I placed their toothpick legs directly into some balls of clay and then made them stand up until they hardened. I even tried to do like more fingers and stuff for their hands, but I gave up and gave them like basically mitts with lines carved into the top to make it look like fingers. I used hot glue to make extra lines on their bodies, and then once they were good and headless and well designed, I made some tinfoil top hats for them. I used hot glue instead of more epoxy sculpt to keep the heads from getting too heavy, and then we get to go over them in paint. I go back and forth with first a coat of black paint, and then go over in cream and white, and then dirty them up with different shades of brown and black. Then I went over again with more white paint and cream. Really, I was just going back and forth to try and get them to be equally grungy and cute looking, like how the game is able to make a very equal balance of both. The final touch for the gnomes is to just paint the one that's holding the sausage. That's just red with a little bit of a touch of orange for lighting. Now for our next miniature victim, Mono. I basically start with the same way that I did with Six, and I start with his face up. I use Mr. Super Clear and chalk pastels to start building up shading and colors on his face. I pretty much give him the same color scheme that I did Six. We begin with highlighting his face with white and darkening the contour with brown. I fill in his nostrils with black watercolor pencils and the inner corners of his mouth as well. I do a little bit more shading along his nose with brown than I did for Six. Since we don't see Mono's face very well, spoilers in the game at all, but if you're come this far, you've probably already known that you were getting into spoilers for a game that's been out for quite a while now. He doesn't have eyes from what I've seen, or at very least the fan art that I've seen, and I decided to go with that design. I sketched out where his eyes and eyebrows were going to be. I gave him kind of a thicker under eye than I gave Six. A little bit more bag to his eye, a little bit of darkness there. I filled in his eyes with entirely black to give them a hollow look. I used both the watercolor pencils and the chalk pastels for this. You kind of have to use a mix of both to give it that very shaded kind of abyss look to it. Not enough chalk pastels and it'll start to look very crayon-y in my opinion. I continue building color with the shadows. I start making his eyebrows look a little bit thicker and drawing individual hairs in there. I highlight the bridge of his nose and his eyelids. I use a cream pencil and a white pencil for the highlights. I also made sure to contour around the sides of his temples quite a bit and the insides of his ears. I cast a little bit of shadow towards the inner corners of his eyes with a pencil and the sides of his nose as well. A light amount of pink will also go on his bottom lip. And then I dirty his body and especially the bottoms of his feet because they are shoeless in the games and running around the whole time. Then I just finished off building color until I felt satisfied with the little spooky cutie. For his hair, we're going to be doing brown yarn wefts. I choose to do it the correct way and begin in the back of his head, and slowly go around the sides to the front. We're doing much shorter pieces here because he's going to have a pretty short hairstyle. I lay down glue where I want the hair to go, press the yarn into place, and then apply more glue to the edges if I feel like it needs that. Once I get to the top of his head, I go ahead and start carefully laying the hair much more gently and with precision, more than I was doing for the bottom layers, which wouldn't show. And once he's all filled out and looks like one of those birds with the awful monk haircut, you go ahead and start trimming. I don't have shears small enough to cut his hair, so I'm just angling my scissors a lot as I go along. I saw some art of him with a longer piece of hair in the very middle of his face, and I played with that at first, but I decided I didn't like that much and just went ahead and cut everything short. Once I was satisfied with that, I began making the patterns for his clothes and moved on to that. Mono has a basic pair of pants for the first section, that's just two of the same pattern. I face them good side to good side, and just like the shorts, you sew all the way down one side for the top part. Here's what that looks like opened up. I went ahead and hemmed the side that would normally have a little bit of Velcro. But again, his outfit is going to be permanent, so it's going to get hot glue gun into his body. I hemmed the very top of his pants all the way along the top. Then I folded it good side to good side, and I sewed a very short amount on the opposite side of the original sewing, where we did the hemming now. Then we open that up to separate the two pieces to create the legs of the pants. Pin it in place and sew from one ankle to the crotch, then back down to the other ankle. I decided to leave the bottom of the pants open for now to make sure that I could turn them inside out correctly without busting the stitching, and also to try them on him and make sure that they fit correctly. Once I realized that they were the correct size, with them on the doll still, I went ahead and sewed the legs up with a ladder stitch. His shirt is made of 3 pieces, 1 for the back, 2 for the front, to give a faux buttoned up look. I take the front pieces and I line up the shoulders, and I sew across the top for the front and back pieces, on both sides. Then I sew down the sides of the shirt with the front and back pieces. I turn that inside out and try it on the doll to make sure that it fits. I fold in the edges of the front of the shirt to make sure that it looks correct, and then I go ahead and start working on his coat. That's 1 back piece, 2 front pieces, and 2 sleeves. I pin all the way around the edge of the front pieces of the coats and sew along to hem them. Then I place the 2 front pieces onto the 1 back piece and sew along the shoulders. That's the first shoulder, and then we put on the second shoulders together and sew that. We use pins to curve along the fabric and make the shoulder piece go into place, and then sew along the curve. Here's how it looks opened up, and then we repeat on the other side. Then we take the fabric and we fold it so it'd be into the shape of a coat. So the sleeve is folded in half, the front and back are touching. And we sew from the wrist to the armpit, then down to the side of the coat, on both sides. I turn that inside out and hem the bottom of the coat. I get Mono back over here for tailoring, and I go ahead and glue his inside shirt onto him, and I cut out the back of the fabric to fit better. Fabric just builds up bulk so quickly on dolls. I go ahead and hot glue gun his pants on, and I glue on fake cuffs to the bottom of his pants. Before we hot glue gun on his coat, I'm going to go ahead and paint on all of his shading now for this layer. Just browns and black. Then I go ahead and try on his coat onto him, and I make sure that it fits correctly before I hot glue gun down the front. I also test to see if any stitches need to be put in place for his coat, but it looks like it flares out pretty nicely on its own. I hot glue gun on some more faux cuffs for the edges of his sleeves. And then I paint the inside of his coat much darker than the outside of it to give it that added shadow that the games give it. His coat looks too clean on the outside in comparison to the rest of him at this point. I go ahead and start shading, and it just starts coming together instantly. Before we go too far, I remembered that I had to add a little piece of fabric to the side that we're going to do a little bit more with later, but that has some snaps attached. A mouse tool, you could say. I sew him a collar out of some pinned material in an oval shape. It's like a Peter Pan collar, kind of. I go ahead and wrap that around his neck and hot glue gun it in place. I made his buttons out of clay, but I realized I made them too big and had to sculpt a new set. I painted them to look like the correct color and went ahead and glued those on. There also gets another button for the back piece that's going to hold a key. Exciting! And a tiny button for his pants. I go back to shading him with these added pieces on. And you can very easily add too much, so if you do this yourself, make sure to slowly build color and not go all hands in unless you're going for that. Kids can be pretty messy, so. For his accessory, I sculpted him a little key that's going to go onto that belt loop we made him for his coat. I just painted it black and then used some gray to give it some highlights. I undo the snaps, slide the key on, and then close it. I couldn't tell if his little mask was supposed to be a box or a paper brown bag, but it's the same concept of folding it shut. I used cardstock and just cut it out and then tested it onto his head. I mark with pencil where the eye holes need to go. He looks kind of derpy in a cute way. I cut those out using an X-Acto knife. Always be careful when using tools that can hurt you. I have to say it. I paint some more cardstock black and I put it behind the eyes to test out that it's in the correct place. I don't glue them in yet just because we're going to be doing the shading first. I dry brush on more shading onto the box the same way that we're doing for the rest of the clothes. At first I thought I did too much, but it looks pretty good, and then I glue in the false eyes. I also had to make them a TV. I'm just built like that. I need to be dramatic with my crafts. I'm a big fan of accessories. I made it out of cardboard and cardstock and paper mache'd over all of the edges, and it felt so original Scooby-Doo-like that me and my sister had to watch some on here. I made it big enough to slot my phone into, so that's how you watch things on it. Then I went over with some grays and blue shades. And the TV is how Mono gets to our world. This was such a fun craft to do. I love them to bits, they're so adorable. All 5 of them, I count the gnomes. For those of you wondering, I will be making the Little Nightmares 3 characters Low and Alone. They're already started, I already got their dolls prepped for that, so stay tuned, subscribe, stick around if you want to see more nightmares. Did you have a favorite between the 2 games, or between the 2 dolls I made? They feel so tiny, even for dolls. Having the gnomes is fun as well because I can just put them anywhere and it feels like kind of like a Mickey Mouse head at the Disneyland parks, just like, oh look, it's in there. And I wasn't really a fan of how Little Nightmares 2 ended, so I decided to give them a happier ending as well. If you're going to make something, you might as well treat them right. The cuties deserve it, anyway. And to all souls feeling lost this October, I hope you find peace in a way that lets you move forward. See you next time, but no goodbye. Toodles!